Hello, hello, hello. Welcome one and all to another episode of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie, and we are here to talk to you about some fights. Does every intro go like that now, Phil? Have I...
Pretty much. I mean, there's a consistent factor there. We are pretty much always here to talk about fights.
Someone help. We can't stop talking about fights. There's more of them to talk about on this week's episode. Let's see. Coming up, we have a UFC on ESPN card. I've come back and forth on this in terms of rating it, Phil. You know, I was like, last week, it's so easy to say, this is better than the friggin' pay-per-view. At least they're not asking me to pay $65 for this. Now the more I look at it, I'm like, it's alright. But the main event, as always, as will be the case going forward with UFC cards, is why you are showing up. And folks, hold on to your asses. I'm about to tell you what the main event is in just a moment. The suspense is building. I'm about to tell you it's Colby Covington versus Robbie Lawler. And that is a damn good fight. Very interesting. Obviously, Robbie Lawler is now at the stage of his career where he's just like, he's like another Rafael dos Anjos at this point. He's kind of just there to put on exciting fights and be a tough test for people. It's not like Covington, much as I loathe the man, really like needs a win over Robbie Lawler to prove that he's a top contender at this point. But it's still a good fight. And Robbie Lawler versus wrestlers is always an interesting, sort of coin flip between like how frustrated and bored will Robbie Lawler be? How insanely violent and pissed off will he be? And at the very least, you know that Colby Covington is going to bring a breakneck pace and a really aggressive, and I think genuinely an exciting style. I know Covington's a wrestler, but I think he's fun to watch. And I don't think many people would disagree with that. So that's a good main event. Other than that, there's only really other one fight on this card that we really want to talk about. It may not surprise you, but a lightweight bout between Joaquim Silva and Nasrat Haqparast. We've been following Haqparast pretty much all throughout his UFC career on this show, and he's back again. He just beat Thibaut Gouti in his last fight in a relatively meaningless bout, although as Phil, you just pointed out before we started, against a version of Gouti who really looked well prepared and showed up to give Haqparast a test. And now he continues his proving process against Joaquim Silva. After we get to that stuff, we're going to talk about UFC 240, the card that was maybe marginally stronger than this, but also cost considerably more money to watch, unless, like me, you didn't do that. The main event, of course, Max Holloway defeated Frankie Edgar, a 5-round decision. Frankie Edgar was robbed. He won every single round by landing 3 fewer, much lighter punches than Max Holloway and attempting more and missing all of his takedowns. And I will take that story to my grave. Chris Cyborg also had a pretty unclose is stretching it, a dominant win over Felicia Spencer. Pretty much all the big fights on 240 were good to watch. They were impressive performances, but not really competitive or close at all. I would say that Jeff Neal versus Nico Price was probably the best fight in terms of back and forth action on the card. And then close second to that was Davison Figueiredo versus Alexandre Pantoja. That fight was a banger, and yet more evidence that the flyweight division rules and should stick around forever. Okay, so all of that ahead of us. Before we get into 240, though, Covington, Lawler. Phil, it's already been 4 minutes of me talking. Please say something. Take over from me.
Okay, so here's my question. Is this a nightmare matchup for Robbie Lawler? Can Robbie Lawler, in his current state, win this kind of fight? More than this, could Robbie Lawler ever win this kind of fight, apart from in one very specific way? So, I mean, I think from this perspective, it's worth looking back at, who Robbie Lawler has been throughout his career and what we've seen from him. Mm-hmm. So I think we've seen a few different iterations of him. Back when he was first starting out, however many years ago, he was pretty much a somewhat formless puncher. And then he had a few disappointing losses and then kind of roamed the world going to Elite XC and Strikeforce and all these various other places, just kind of being an action fighting, not quite journeyman, but generally a gatekeeper type.
I think journeyman's fair. I have a broader definition for that label than most, but Robbie Lawler was a high-level journeyman during that whole wandering Ronin middleweight period of his career.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the guy that I think we've got now, because when he came into the UFC, we saw a much more kind of patient and much more technically functional, I think, version of Robbie Lawler, as in he clearly had genuinely worked hard on the areas where he thought he was weaker in a way which he necessarily hadn't before. Like, he was much more willing to, he'd clearly trained his wrestling much more. Mm-hmm. He was much less willing to let kicks go. You could see him fight much more strategically. And he was able to kind of grasp the rhythm of a fight, control it, and take it over. I think there was a stretch of fights from, I think the first Johnny Hendricks fight to the Condit fight, where I think that was really peak Robbie Lawler from a strategic standpoint. The guy that we've got now, I think, has kind of reverted to form a bit. Mm-hmm. He's no longer kind of taking the time to feel the rhythm out. He's no longer, he's not defending in the way that he was when he was the champion. He's not coming in with, he might be coming in with specific game plans, but he is not the same kind of, he's not exactly the cerebral fighter that he was in that particular run, I would say.
Yeah, at this point, I would be surprised to see Robbie come out and have a kick work against him, like in the first Rory McDonald fight, and then realize why it works, and then start using it, and then go back to his corner and said, "That's my kick now. I stole his kick." You know what I mean? Like, Robbie Lawler is pretty much, you can count him to do very typical Robbie Lawler things in every fight now, it seems.
Yeah. And I think his game plans are much more simple now.
Yes.
In that he's starting a lot faster than he did in many of those fights, but it is kind of in the way that he used to, in that it's a single explosion of violence, and then he'll just take a huge amount of time off. Mm-hmm. And again, this isn't something that he didn't necessarily do when he was fighting, for example, Johnny Hendricks the second time out. He came out really aggressive in the first round and then took the second round entirely off. But it feels like the violence has become more sporadic and harder to maintain.
Even in the Carlos Condit fight. I would say like the prime period of Lawler's career was between the Koscheck fight, his re-debut in the UFC, and the rematch with Rory McDonald. Everything in that area was like Robbie Lawler at his athletic best, game plans very clearly tailored for the variety of opponents in front of him. And then that Carlos Condit fight, like the big argument about who deserved to win that fight was Condit's volume versus Robbie Lawler doing basically nothing and then just exploding with violence once in a while.
Yeah, that's a great read, I think. Yeah, I would totally co-sign on that. Yeah, I always felt that the Condit fight, as incredible as the fifth round specifically is, I feel it's also, I've always felt like Rogan's call at the end of it, like when they're both on the edge of the fence and they say, emptied out, nothing left. Like, I always felt like that was kind of prophetic, and it did feel like, to me, it was a fight from both guys where I felt it felt a little uncharacteristic. It felt like they were both starting to slip away a bit.
And I would even say, like, I think Robbie Lawler probably lost a good bit of whatever made him the new Robbie Lawler in the Rory McDonald rematch, and the Condit fight was him reckoning with that change. Yep. So here's the question. Robbie Lawler has always been someone with bursts of violence and then periods of time off. That has become only exacerbated, I think. That was something which he managed to mediate during what we've determined as his prime,
and he's kind of reverted to his prior style of being like bigger bursts and much bigger gaps since then. He's never really been particularly great at fighting people who just keep an incredibly monotonous high pace on him, no matter who they are or how they fight. It has really not been a style which Robbie Lawler has done tremendously well against. And that was partially why I think we got, or at least I got, the Rafael dos Anjos fight wrong. Because I was expecting, Lawler's going to be bigger, he's a more powerful puncher, he's going to be able to handle himself in the clinch, all these things which were true, but Dos Anjos underestimated how much damage he could do to Lawler as a kicker, but also just how much, if Lawler does his stuff where he takes time off in his fights, and he's up against someone who just keeps coming,
right,
he's just losing that round very badly, and he's probably going to get beaten up quite badly for it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they kind of Homer Simpson, they kind of, tire themselves out beating him up, then that's just damage that he can't necessarily afford at this stage in his career.
Yeah.
And so it's a fight where, Covington the Covington fight with RDA was one which was defined by an incredible pace. I mean, it's one of the most high-paced matchups I've ever seen in this sport, mutually. Like, the torrid pace that these two guys set was just unfathomable. And Covington just about came out on top in that. But Dos Anjos just kind of buzzsawed Lawler when he fought him.
Yeah. I think... go on, please.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I think there are actually a lot of parallels between Lawler and RDA, what kind of fighter beats them. And I think maybe one of the big things we talked about Lawler's game planning and everything, but if you look at that great last hurrah period of his career, one thing that really defined those fights was pressure. Was Robbie Lawler not allowing people to back him up and push him around. Asserting himself. Robbie Lawler's jab was a huge part of that period. That certainly by the time of that Carlos Condit fight, that jab was missing until the 5th round. Robbie Lawler's kicking game was quite a big part of those fights because he was pushing people backwards. He was making them move their heads and move into his kicks. He was using it to corral people around. And so, Lawler has more power than RDA. I think he's a little savvier defensively. But he had to kind of coax himself into doing the thing that almost allowed RDA to beat Covington, which is being able to put a pace on and move forward. And that certainly allowed RDA to beat him. He could not do that to RDA, even though the game plan is there. If you strategize for RDA, you're going to push him backwards, and that's how you're going to beat him. Don't let him pressure. Lawler was not able to do that. And he didn't look like he really had much interest in doing that in that fight. You have the same problems as RDA, the same weaknesses to aggressive, nonstop wrestlers, but you do not have RDA's compunction for pressing forward and pressuring yourself. Then it's it really does feel like a Robbie Lawler has to land one big shot, or guillotine Colby Covington like Worley Alves did, or some shit like that.
Yeah, and that's worth thinking about as an outcome, because we saw, for example, hyper aggressive when
Damian Maia won the first round on the feet against Colby Covington. Man is there to be hit. He's so aggressive. He knows he needs to keep the pace on to win. He will not allow himself to back off unless he's badly hurt. And even then, he's probably more likely to dive in on your legs. So, Lawler's counterpunching ability is going to be really, really important here. His power is going to be a big factor. There's a better chance than pretty much anyone else Colby Covington has fought that he gets knocked out suddenly at some point, even if he's winning the fight.
Yeah, so both Lawler and Masvidal both decided against Ben Askren. You know what? I'm going to just fucking nuke this guy right out of the gate.
Right.
He might be a round winning threat, but he's certainly not a finishing threat.
Yep.
I can just go balls to the wall. And there's no reason to assume that Lawler couldn't or shouldn't do that for this fight as well.
Probably will.
He should, I would one of those fights where I would genuinely recommend just coming out and trying to take Covington's head off right at the beginning. He doesn't have to train for much to be able to hit him. Like, as you said, he's a much bigger hitter than RDA, and RDA landed on Covington a lot. Like you said, Damian Maia landed a shit ton. But other than that, if he doesn't rip Covington's head off early, which is a distinct possibility, Covington he keeps a tremendous pace. He stays on top of his feet. He's not gonna, if he gets hit by counters, I don't think they're not gonna knock him out. He's not a defensive savant or a particularly amazing striker, but he's a incredibly enthusiastic and tough one. And just being relentless it's worked too well against Robbie Lawler throughout his career for me to be you could say that he was outsized in a lot of those fights, but was he really outsized by like Jason Miller, for example, back in the day? Right. Or Jake Shields, or tons of these other guys who were just like decided to go after him and would not be deterred. Yeah. Covington is a good kicker, traditionally something which has troubled Lawler, particularly as you mentioned, he seems to have kind of reverted back to his sort of kill or die brawler style. He's a very light kicker, which I think will be helpful. He's got a very, I do like Covington's kind of snapping head and body kicks when he's coming in. He manages to, pressure behind them a lot. I think he does have a very functional style, and like you said, he's a very fun fighter to watch. He's just a dick. Yeah,
I hate to say it, but fun, functional, the process all makes sense. There's little technical details, but for me, it's really the fact that I think there was sometimes a size element. There have been adaptations that Robbie Lawler has made, but I'm frequently these days reminded of one of your great axioms, Phil, that style matchups never change. And RDA, for some reason I'm hooked on this comparison, but RDA, he has been making these little adjustments. It has compromised, I think, his original style to have made all of the changes and improvements to pursue the new directions he's tried to pursue in recent years, to become a more flexible defensive fighter, a better sort of out fighter. I think it's neutered his pressure somewhat, but it was almost enough to allow him to hang with Colby Covington. Robbie Lawler had that period, and now he's out of it. And not only has Robbie Lawler historically lost to these guys, he has historically become extremely frustrated. And there was a brief window in his career where he was able to channel that fury in a way that made sense. The second Johnny Hendricks fight was a great example of him picking the right moments and be like, I'm fucking pissed. This dude's been holding me against the fence. And then he does something. He pushes the guy backwards. He throws combinations. But otherwise, he's either the guy who sat there making faces at the ref while Hendricks is holding onto his legs doing nothing, or he's the guy who got so mad that he allowed Nick Diaz to knock him out with one punch. I don't think Lawler deals with the frustrating styles all that well.
Yeah, I think at heart most people tend to fall into a few basic archetypes of how they think about the sport, and I think Lawler is basically, he's a fighter, and that's good in some ways and bad in others, because he's a guy where he's got his own vision of how he thinks the sport should be, something he could hold on to for a very long time. But it's also one that means that he doesn't necessarily respect or like some of the other styles of fighting. Whereas I think RDA is a competitor. Yes. He very much wants to win. And I think Lawler very much wanted to win for a few fights. For that period where we saw prime Lawler, I think he was like, everyone said I was this amazing prospect, but I've been in this game for however many years. I've never won a title. Everyone kind of seems to expect me to lose these fights at this point. fuck this shit, I'm going to win now.
This is why I always describe RDA, like the word I always use for RDA is professional. The man is a goddamn professional, and Robbie Lawler is much more of a guy who fights to prove a point. And, there was that brief period where he, married those two things together. He was like, I'm going to prove a career-long point by taking it really seriously. But now he's just the guy who, gets mad and is like, man, wait till I get really pissed. Then I'm going to rip your head off. And then the fight's over. And he's like, oh, shit. I forgot we were doing this in a professional capacity. Yeah, I don't think it's a good matchup for Robbie. But I think there is a distinct chance that he takes Covington's head off. Covington is certainly not,
defensively good.
Yes. He's in fact quite defensively bad. He's made some improvements there, but he's there to be hit. So there's something.
His defense is punching and wrestling.
Absolutely.
And having good posture.
His defense.
Other than that, he does not have really anything I would particularly describe as defense.
Which again is still very likely to work. Like if you're against Robbie Lawler, if your defense is to make the other guy regret trying to hit you, by dragging him into using his attempt to drag him into a much worse fight for him, that worked. That sounds great if you're fighting Robbie Lawler. So I agree with pretty much everything you've said. Robbie Lawler, fingers crossed, but Colby Covington is the pick to make. Shall we take a break? And when we come back, we'll cover Joaquim Silva versus Nasrat Haqparast. That'll be our last fight, our last preview, rather, before we move on to recapping and breaking down all the nonsense that happened at UFC 240. So all of that after this break.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Okay, welcome back. Nasrat Haqparast taking on Joaquim Silva. And every time I talk about Joaquim Silva, I have to mention my favorite detail about him, which is that he is the new Vitor Belfort. Because, Phil, do you remember that time in Vitor Belfort's career when he would go and, smash a guy in the face with, a blitzkrieg of punches, and then he would run around screaming, Jiu-Jitsu! Jiu-Jitsu! Like, that had anything to do with what had just happened in the fight?
Yep.
Well,
so we have Neto BJJ.
Neto BJJ has literally never done a BJJ in the cage. He likes to punch people. But that is maybe to his advantage against a guy like Nasrat Haqparast, who has already beaten one crazy, powerful, athletic monster in Mark Jacasey in his career, but not one who I think has the narrow focus that Joaquim Silva has, which is don't let this other dude knock you out. Getting knocked out is for pussies. Hit him back anytime he hits you, and hit him in the body. Joaquim Silva is one of those fighters who's powerful and tough. And basically, he can win a lot of fights that would not be winnable for other fighters merely by making a couple of the right decisions. In his last fight with Jared Gordon, it was nailing Gordon's body, I think, that made a key difference in the last round of that back and forth fight. But it should be a very interesting test for someone in Nasrat Haqparast who at 23 years old, I think is, really, really destined for great things. You can't say that in MMA, of course. Who knows what will happen? But if you were designing a prospect, someone who had a really good shot of climbing the ranks, you would very likely design someone like Nasrat Haqparast. So, Phil, your thoughts on the matchup?
Yeah, it's a great fight. In a lot of ways, it feels like they've just given Haqparast a step up from his last fight.
Yeah.
This Neto BJJ is a not dissimilar fighter to Thibault Gouti.
No, not at all, actually. Just way more athletic.
Yeah. And that wasn't a fight that Haqparast just destroyed Guti in.
Definitely not.
It was a clear-cut 30-27 or more win, but it was still one where Guti had his moments of success.
Competitive, but clear.
Yeah. So, Hack Pressed has been the product of kind of two of MMA's elite gyms, of TriStar and Kings. And at the moment, like, he definitely looks more like a Kings fighter in terms of who he is and how he approaches the game. I mean, he is a pressure southpaw, and that is the style that Cordero has always kind of done the best with.
An aggressive combination punching southpaw.
Yep. So the question is, can Neto BJJ's kind of diversity in his strikes make up for the kind of the consistency of Hack Pressed? Because I think if Hack Pressed has a problem that we've seen in his fights thus far, is that he does tend to get a little left-hand heavy. And this is somewhat of a Cordero. This can be a Cordero issue as well.
I agree.
In general, is that they do get his fighters can get somewhat in love with the left straight and the left overhand.
That's why he has not done much to solve some of Calvin Gastelum's larger problems.
Yeah. And I'm inclined to say that the answer to that one is yes. I think Hack Pressed is just going to. I think he will. Because I think that Joaquim Silva's last fight was somewhat characterized by the fact that he was able to withstand Jared Gordon's pressure and then kind of turn it around on him with big moments.
Yeah.
And part of the reason he was able to do that is that he physically outclassed Jared Gordon. And I don't necessarily think that will be the case here. I think he definitely takes some time to get into the fight. He is a guy who, wants to feel out the fight before he can really get going, and Hack Pressed will not give him that at all. I think Hack Pressed is going to be on him from the bell, and he's not going to have the same kind of insulating physicality that he did against Gordon.
Yeah.
Hack Pressed will hurt him much worse for a slow start.
Yeah. I still have my concerns, though, about Silva as an opponent. Like, I do still think this is a good matchup. Because it is not just that. I mean, Joaquim Silva he's powerful, he's durable. These things matter. I agree with you. Like, Hack Pressed's speed, I think, is going to be a huge difference between how cleanly and how often he's able to hit Silva versus the other way around. There's like two kinds of power out there. There's bang and there's boom. There's getting hit by a shotgun or getting hit by a truck. Moving very slowly. Silva's, I think, a little more heavy-handed, a little more booming power. Hack Pressed has that speed where it's like a flash that really shocks you. And it does strike me that Silva's like a sitting duck for those kinds of punches. He's not really nuanced defensively. He's really, really plodding. So anyone who like comes in blitzing, looking to come off around one side, then the other side, they're going to hit him blind an awful lot. But Hack Pressed is also not a very efficient fighter yet. He has had fights before, I think, where we have seen, like the Jacasey fight, for example. I think we saw a decent amount of slowing down from him in that fight, not as much as we saw from Jacasey. But I think Silva's a lot better put together to deal with that kind of matchup. I think he's a lot better tuned to just sort of absorb the worst of it, survive it if he can by shelling up, and then when he does attack, unlike someone like Jacasey, who I guess Jacasey had a bit of this in that fight, but Silva is a combination puncher. He uses his left hand and his right hand. He will throw uppercuts, hooks, straights off of both hands. And as I said, a really important thing in that Jared Gordon fight was the body punching. So I think all of those are things that, like, what do you think about Hack Pressed's wrestling ability as something that might change this fight? Because that was not a huge factor for Jared Gordon. Maybe it should have been a bigger factor. Silva's takedown defense held up, and Gordon had trouble, I think, getting to the distance to shoot. But Hack Pressed is much faster, much better timing than Jared Gordon. Do you think there's a chance that he can that we might actually see some Neto BJJ?
Yeah, so I think, so Gordon did show the ability to, Gordon did, I think, he got Joaquim Silva's back at some point in the early going, but he couldn't really get anything going with it. But I don't think he was having, at least, like I said, in the early going of the fight, he was able to, like, grapple quite happily with Joaquim Silva.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think Hak Perez could. I think Hak Perez has fallen in love with his hands, though.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're going to see any wrestling from him, even if it's kind of a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it debatably was against Guti, and he just...
Right.
Because Guti has been out-wrestled several times.
Yeah.
And Hak Perez was just like, no, I'm just going to bang it out with this guy.
Which could be like hey, this is a matchup where it makes sense for me to work on my striking a bit, to get some time in. But also, I'm never super sure how often fighters are doing that. Like, I know it is a thing that happens, but most of the time, fighters are just kind of doing what it looks like they're doing in the cage.
And this is notably this has got to be a fight where I think it's the first fight where Hak Perez isn't easily the bigger puncher.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, Jacasey that's not definitively the case, but Jacasey is a big puncher, but he's not a comfortable one. The way to diffuse him is just to fight like Hak Perez, is to stay in the pocket and never let him out again. That his punching traditionally comes from like doing weird things and setting people up and getting them to walk into it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not but Hak Perez is fighting someone who can counter punch and box in the pocket and who is comfortable and who is a hitter like him. And he's been extremely confident in that space. And this may be a fight where he's a little overconfident.
These are both dudes who do a lot of hard sparring and are used to overwhelming people. So like, I think we might, like, I'm going to pick Hak Perez here. I basically already have, but he's going head to head with a slugger. And that is kind of how I agree. That's kind of how I expect him to approach this fight, given what we've seen out of him lately. So it's dangerous, especially if he starts to slow down, especially if Silva just makes, again, that power, that durability. If he just makes a couple of the right decisions, he's got a lot more room for error than most other fighters would. So, good matchup. Exciting. I'll take Hak Perez for speed, for aggression, for volume, for accuracy. These are all things that should work well against Silva. It's just whether they'll be enough to actually secure the fight is the question.
Yep. I think having a single-minded game plan and sticking to it it's pretty good. If you're just a confident young fighter and you've got an aggressive, you're aggressive and tough, I think it's going to be, Neto BJJ is going to be, he's going to be fighting his way out of a hole, I think, and it will be tough.
Yeah, but that does kind of describe both these fighters.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Shall we move on to UFC 240 at this point?
Let's
do it. Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar. Again, I want to say this, like, I would say the three best fights on this card, there were four fights in this card that were like really good. Which is not to trash the others, but the standouts were Figueiredo Pantoja, Neil Price, Cyborg Spencer, Holloway Edgar. I'm not even sure Cyborg Spencer belongs in that category, to be honest. But it was, I do enjoy watching Cyborg beat people up, so that works. But to me, like, except for Neil Price, there were some strong themes running through connecting these fights, and yes, I think competitive but not close was kind of the tone of the night for me, and I think Holloway Edgar really underlines that. Like, I know there's going to be at least one madman out there who thinks that Frankie Edgar actually won this fight. I know there are people out there who think the 48-47 card was, like, good. And I don't want to talk to either of those groups of people. But to me, this was a fight in which, like, Max Holloway basically had it all his own way. From the start to the finish, he looked very much in control, very comfortable. And I want to know if you think the same thing.
I have mixed feelings about this fight. From a Holloway perspective, I thought it was it was a clear win over a undeniably great opponent who I thought actually showed up looking really good.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Frankie did an excellent job in terms of keeping Holloway slightly off guard right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also a fight where I think a few of Holloway's problems were perhaps highlighted that we've seen throughout his last few performances. So
we're reaching that point where Holloway's going to have to start really adjusting to holding the throne, or the next wave of challengers will have learned a lot from the people he has fought recently.
Yeah. So I think what we've seen from Holloway is that he's someone who is a genius at kind of mixing up his strikes on offense and at kind of coming in at an angle and then using that angle to build on more strikes. But we've also seen someone who's kind of willing to, and increasingly in this fight, who's willing to fence at range. But we've also seen someone who, when he is forced backwards, doesn't have a huge diversity of defensive options available to him.
Right.
He is not Jose Aldo yet, if he ever will be.
Yeah. Not of the defense nor the counterpunching. It's notable that when Holloway is backing up in a straight line, he's backing up. You can come after him and swing big shots, and you have a decent chance of connecting.
Yeah, so a lot of what Edgar was able to do, and I thought he did this very smartly. He was very unpredictable with his attack. He came in with, body kicks, leg kicks. It really struck me once again that Edgar has a wonderfully diverse right hand. He's gotten very good at cross-countering jabs, which he did multiple times to Holloway, which meant that Holloway spent a lot of the fight just trying to line up right hands in one way or the other, because he was just like, wow, this guy really trained cross-counters for Jose Aldo the second time. But yeah, he also builds off the cross-counters into these kind of chasing combinations.
That, by the way, is sort of the same decision that Aldo himself made when he fought Frankie the second time. We had to watch out for the cross counters. It's okay, it's lead rights now. And
yeah,
the
crazy thing that always struck me in that fight is that Aldo did it immediately.
Right.
It's that he barely even needed to throw jabs. He was just like, "All right, I see."
I know what you're looking for.
I never figured out how he did it. It was from the way Edgar must have been something about it. He was just like, "Oh, he's ready for the jab."
Yeah,
all right,
I think Edgar's always had a bit of a telegraph for trying to line up his right hand. He takes a very obvious step out and forward to his left. To me, I always thought Aldo probably picked up on that he throws that jab. He just sees Edgar's always trying to circle towards his left and line up the right. So he's like, all right, I'm just going to crack you in the face, because when you make that move, you are also opening your center line to the other guy's right hand.
Yep. That sounds very right to me. But the difference was that when Edgar lined up that right hand or went for that right hand on Holloway would traditionally just kind of back out, and Edgar was able to chase him down with those combinations, and it was reasonably effective. The main dynamic in this fight was simply that Holloway was able to, as we thought he might, pick up on Edgar's head movement increasingly as the fight went on. He was able to tag Edgar with the same uppercut that has stalked Edgar throughout his career. But when Edgar went after Aldo with those combinations, Aldo would slip, he would pivot, he would counter, and he would sometimes just gently guide Edgar out of the way. He'd just be like, bye, as he went past. It didn't really happen so much with Holloway. Holloway was just insulated by, his reach, his awareness, and the fact that, he could pick Edgar off as he came in. And he can pick him off moving backwards, but he's still not he's not a big counter puncher.
No.
And in a similar way to like John Jones, there's or even Conor McGregor, there's a point at which Holloway is in escape mode where he's only going to be doing one thing.
Yes.
And that's just scooting backwards as fast as humanly possible. And at that point, you really can just run at him.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was a hold performance for me because I thought he did a good job of mitigating damage. He did a tremendous job stopping the takedowns, apart from that one round where Edgar got one and just annihilated him with it.
And basically won the whole fight in that moment.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Greatest takedown I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. Eat your heart out, Khabib. So, I thought it was a pretty commanding performance, but it wasn't one which left me thinking, like, wow, that was a technical evolution we've seen from Holloway. It was him fighting a safe fight against a fighter that was safe to do against, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
If he'd been up against a bigger puncher who could throw the same combinations as Edgar was throwing, but with more behind them. I mean, we literally saw that.
If he literally brought this
against Aldo and Poirier,
right?
That is still very much there.
Yeah, if he brought this approach to Dustin Poirier, much of the same things would happen. I'm with you on most of that. I'm going to mitigate. I'm basically with you on like all of your analysis of what happened. I'm going to mitigate your conclusion a little bit. There was one thing that stood out to me that Holloway did in this fight that I have not noticed him doing to this extent before, which was defensive jabbing. I thought, obviously, like he had a bigger reach advantage here. I would still like to think that this is a technique that'll cross over into other fights. But I thought that he did a really good job of not just pressing forward and using his jab to, get the other guy moving and create openings for the right hand, but he did a lot of retreating behind his jab, especially as the fight went on. You're right. Like he still reaches a point where he's just retreating and there is no reason not to run after him. But even there, like say around the beginning of the second round, that had happened a couple times in the first. Edgar had started to back him up, had started to flurry, basically realized he could. And then like shortly into the second round, Edgar tries to press forward with a bunch of like pumping jabs. He wants to just rush Holloway backwards towards the fence, and Holloway just pokes him in the face with a jab as he hops back. And that happened a lot throughout the fight. In fact, that was one of the other like thematic things I noticed, is that retreating behind jabs was a major factor in Holloway's performance and in Cyborg's, and in Jeff Neal's over Nico Price. But it's a really, really good tactic. It's a really fundamental, basic thing, but a lot of MMA fighters do not do it. Just if you're going to back up, you should have your jab out in front of you, because if the other guy doesn't follow you, fine, you've lost nothing. It's the easiest punch to throw, and you really just have to stick your arm out. If he does follow you, he runs into it. And either way, he can see it. He knows there's a threat there, so it just disincentivizes people to chase after you. I liked that. I thought that was a good adjustment, something it looked like he had worked on to improve what are really definitely becoming more obvious problems with pressure, with just aggressive combination punchers. These are going to be the people who give Holloway lots of trouble down the road. So yeah, I would still like to see Holloway has great footwork, but I want to see more subtle defensive footwork out of him too. I want to see, I don't want to see a guy who comes forward with all these small steps, takes these beautiful angles, is like just out of the way or just off to the side enough that the wild counters you're throwing at him don't quite land while he's still hitting you. I don't want to see the guy demonstrating that level of footwork look quite as much like Luke Rockhold on the back foot as Max Holloway does, where he's threatened and then he just commits to this big bounding leap backwards. Like, that is not an expert level piece of footwork. That is something that can be easily exploited. I want to see more small steps. I want to see pivots, but retreating behind a jab to me is the start of that, because at the very least, if you're retreating behind your jab more often, it means you are always facing your opponent. You are more grounded. You are well positioned to make all the other moves that you might want to make. So I do consider that like an important fundamental thing. I thought Holloway did a really good job of interrupting Edgar, and and of just not allowing him to get all that much done with those forward rushes. You know, they still had an effect, but I thought Holloway dealt with them well enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small improvement. Like I said, I think this is a good performance. It's not a great performance, and it's because Holloway has set the bar so very, very high that we can afford to be critical of him.
Right.
I mean, I don't know when the last time I picked against Max Holloway even was. I think it was when he fought Dennis Bermudez. I think I picked him every time since then.
And you've pretty much always been right? Like, that's the brilliance of Max Holloway. That's how good he is.
Yeah. I just remembered seeing him, like, I was like, holy shit, this guy learned how to defend takedowns from Dennis Bermudez in, like, 3 fights.
Uh-huh.
Like, since I saw him getting ragdolled by Dustin Poirier, he's now defending against Dennis Bermudez. This guy's a freak.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's been a ride from there. So yeah, he's still amazing. He's still the best featherweight in the world,
but we are now
seeing his next fight.
We, like his challengers, we are now learning the ins and outs of his style, and the limitations contained therein. So, no matter how great Holloway is, I think it is going to be a challenge for him to make enough technical, physical adjustments to the way he operates moving backwards to reach the point where it won't be like a genuine stylistic flaw. Everyone has them pretty much. Everyone but the very, very, very best. Even Jose Aldo, it turns out, the guy that I would have described as like the all-terrain fighter, and probably did on this show a few years ago. Even Jose Aldo has now, enough people have seen him and made the right observations based on what they've seen that they can find the holes in this game. And Holloway's got him too. All right, that's that. It was still a good fight. I mean, it's certainly none of these like ones that we're going to discuss were bad to watch by any stretch. But yeah, UFC 240. It was an ambivalent pay-per-view for me. So much as I love Max, why don't we move on? One more break. When we come back, Cyborg Spencer. Not a whole lot to say on that. Then there was Jeff Neal versus Nico Price. Very exciting fight. And Jeff Neal continues to impress. And then we're going to talk about Davison Figueiredo and Alexandre Pantoja. All of that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back. Let's go ahead and talk about the co-main event of UFC 240, the women's featherweight fight between, until recently, former champion Chris Cyborg and new challenger Felicia Spencer.
I thought this fight was just a tremendous display of heart, personally.
From Chris Cyborg?
Yes.
Did I steal your punchline from you? Shit, I'm sorry. Do you want to set that up again? Let's run it back.
No, let's not.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, how did she survive that fight?
How did she fight through such exhaustion?
Yeah.
She was absolutely wheezing by like the 30-second mark. Yeah, we haven't mentioned this, by the way, but like Joe Rogan was abysmal on this card. He was so bad. What was going on?
I mean, okay, either he's he doesn't give a shit anymore and he's really rich and he's just exploring the depths of how bad he can get at commentary, or like when he was astral traveling, he met the spinning mandala at the center of the universe, which told him that like violence is an essential part of the human existence, but violence should never be cost-free. And that it's fundamentally wrong for us to watch violence in a way and not be upset. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of Rogan's job to appall and horrify us as we're sitting there consuming like people fucking each other up.
Yeah, I did see some people suggesting that, like, I have to wonder, very conspiracy brain happening right now, but, like, how much of Dana White's desire to, like, downplay Chris Cyborg either directly or indirectly has an effect on that kind of stuff? Because it was weird to me how doggedly Joe Rogan was holding on to the Chris Cyborg is exhausted narrative in that fight. Like, given what we watched playing out, I'm like, what are you talking about? She's breathing heavy. Like, yeah, she's fighting. She's also winning pretty much every minute of the fight. Every 30-second period of the fight, she has won.
Well, I mean, if it is, it was very well cleverly disguised because he was dog shit throughout the entire card.
That's a very
thus,
good
he gave himself excellent cover. And it also does fit in with his historic tendency to just assume that any bricked up, and specifically any bricked up non-white American athlete is immediately on the verge of gassing.
Because it's not
These
fair.
muscles take up so much oxygen.
It's not fair if they don't get tired. I get tired. I'm Joe Rogan, and I'm tired all the time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was, I mean...
My huge neck is fucking shaking from having to hold up my head.
But yeah, like, I mean, there was the points where, like, Arman Tsarukyan went for a takedown on OAM, and he was like,
oh my god, he was surprised.
Wow, he's going for a takedown.
Oh.
I mean, surely you would have thought he's like, you've never seen him fight, have you? You just watched the highlight reel of him doing stupid kicks.
Yeah, this is not a clever MMA joke, but I did see just one comment or one reply that just made me cackle with laughter, which was people were like, what was up with Joe Rogan? And someone just said, Joe Rogan's a casual. He's a fucking casual. He doesn't know what the fuck he's looking at. He's a goddamn casual. So yeah, anyway, all of that aside, Joe Rogan thought Arman Tsarukyan was a striker and thought Chris Cyborg couldn't beat a grappler who tried to clinch her. Chris Cyborg did that. She beat a grappler who tried to clinch her. Did anything stand out to you about this fight? I will say one thing. People were noting the fact that Chris Cyborg did not knock Felicia Spencer out as a negative. Do you have a take on that? Do you think she has lost some snap or some speed? I think she may have lost some of that explosiveness. I mean, she's 35. Do you think she's taken the power off to become a little more technical? Or do you think Felicia Spencer is just insanely tough, or what combination of these three or whatever other explanations?
Yeah, it's probably some of all of the above. I mean, Cyborg is
true centrist,
is
Phil.
Getting on. Thank you.
Pick a side, you ingrate.
No, I mean, Cyborg is obviously getting on a bit.
Yeah.
She's, this was as we said, this was the Tonya Evinger fight, but Felicia Spencer is younger and has less wear on her than Tonya Evinger, and Tonya Evinger lasted into the third round.
Mm-hmm. True.
I can't really criticize. I mean, I really hate it when people criticize someone for just dealing out a completely one-sided shit kicking.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard to knock people out, and weird things happen sometimes. Like there's almost always some kind of, unless there's a huge disparity, there's generally some kind of luck involved in getting a knockout.
Oh, absolutely.
And sometimes it just doesn't materialize. But mostly, I mean, this was just a one-sided whooping.
Yeah, I mean, can I be honest? I think some of it, I don't want to, this is maybe drawing too broad of a narrative from this, but, I think women's MMA has gotten better since, when Chris Cyborg was, first became a dominant force, since she beat Gina Carano and made herself the star of women's featherweight. And, genuinely, Felicia Spencer looked like someone who had done some hard sparring. She just wasn't flinching away from all the shots. It was actually impressive that she, pretty much kept herself in the exchange even as she was losing every exchange. So not only her toughness, but just, she had the poise of someone who's, she acted like she'd been there before. And a lot of the women that Cyborg was just one shot knocking out throughout the earlier stages of her career would just like close their eyes and shy away the moment they saw her winding up on her right hand. So I don't know if that corroborates what you were saying or not, but I think Spencer was tough. I didn't think that Cyborg looked like she looked a little slower. I didn't think she looked like, suddenly she's lost all her power, now she's shot.
Yeah, I mean, it was I think it wasn't very different from, it was pretty much what we expected, and I think, she still showed some of the problems which you thought she might, in that she was fighting someone who couldn't hurt her, and so she didn't really have much defense beyond the fact that she has a very good jab. Her head is still in the same place every single time.
Yep.
But other than that, it was almost exactly what we expected, just that Felicia Spencer was super tough and super game and actually got some decent work in the clinch done.
Yeah, that's about it. Okay, well, flyweights or welterweights? Your pick, my friend.
These were both pretty awesome.
Uh-huh.
I do like Nico Price is increasingly a guy who is just guaranteed entertainment as soon as he steps in there.
He rules. He's really weird. He also he looks weirder than I remembered. Like his arms are too long, his shoulders are too wide, his hands are way too big.
His the way his shoulders kind of jut up out of the his arms jut up above his torso. Weird.
He looks like,
but yeah,
he looks very dismissive. Anyway, please go on.
He's he's also, as we mentioned last time, he's one of those weird guys who's just able to hurt people, but clearly isn't an athlete.
Yeah.
There were multiple times when Neil was bullying him around in the clinch where he'd slam him on the floor, and it was a really kind of Hazlitt-esque way of getting slammed that you only really get when the person getting slammed isn't particularly physically ready for it, if that makes any sense. He would hit the mat like spaghetti getting thrown against the wall. You're just man, this guy's kind of noodly. But then you get reminded that he's kind of noodly with wrecking balls on the end of the noodles. But Jeff Neal showed got knocked down, got hurt, showed a ton of toughness. I mean, he's really proving what a great prospect he is.
Absolutely.
Realized that he could just kind of Hulk Price around, and did that. He looks great. I mean, in general, I'm pretty impressed by the guys out of Fortis MMA where he trains. They just seem to put forward really consistent, well-rounded mixed martial artists.
Yeah, no doubt that is a breakout camp. Yeah, I mean, I thought, again, in this fight, I thought Neal's jab was really on point. I thought he did a great job with it. I think something that really stood out to me, I really liked his how quickly and how consistently he took advantage of every clinch break and every tie-up in this fight. He did a really fantastic job of getting in close. There would be kind of an awkward entanglement, and he would step off to the side and just nail Price with frequently a short left uppercut or left hook on the chin. I thought that was great. He went between head position in the clinch wrestling to breaking away and landing a hard shot. Another thing that stood out though that I really liked, Jeff Neal throws combinations when he's doing ground and pound. He postured up over Nico Price on the ground and threw straight left, right uppercut combos to get around his defenses, and took the steam off of his ground and pound punches, just to prioritize the speed. It's exactly the way that he throws combinations in the pocket on the feet. Because Neal is, I think in some ways, kind of a rote combination puncher. He just kind of does like the combos that Ioane and Jacek used to throw, where she was not really super carefully targeting. It's shoe shine shit, super fast. Those quick Manny Pacquiao style combos, even where it's just a burst of 3 or 4 really quick punches. Neal does that. He'll slip to the outside, and then his quick right uppercut, quick left, quick right hook, another quick left, and then he steps away. But to do that on the ground, I don't know why it's as rare as it is. But if you're on your knees, postured up over someone, hit him with both hands with a combination. Like, the same things still work. All of it still applies. And I liked seeing that. And otherwise, yeah, the man showed heart. He pulled through a tough situation, a double knockdown with a clash of heads. And
I thought, and I thought Price did a good job as well. Like, a lot of the time he's been perhaps someone who's relies on getting people into brawls with him, but this time he was really aggressive with the kicks. He kind of forced a high-paced fight out of Neil. He was just like, if you stand out there, I'm just going to keep kicking you. You're going to come in and exchange with me. Mm-hmm. And then, they clearly didn't want Neil exchanging with him, but he kind of had to. And when he hurt Price just decided to go ham. And it almost worked.
Mm-hmm. He followed Neil out of the exchange and these weird lunging, awkward, sort of hook, sort of straight punches that Price throws. He's an oddball, but he's not bad. He's just really different.
Yeah. It was just great fun. And looking forward to seeing both of those guys.
For sure. Do you have an idea of what level you'd like to see Jeff Neal go to next? Clearly he deserves a step up in competition, I think.
There's a ton of action fighters up there. I'm tempted. The thing is, so many of them have earned really great, they've earned great things, and it would be a bit of a step back for them to take on someone like Jeff Neal. Your division. Vicente Luque, your Santiago Ponzinibbio's, etc.
Zaleski dos Santos.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe Zaleski dos Santos, but yeah, it feels like a lot of those guys they've really put the hours in. So it would have to be someone like those, but on the tier below them, and I'm not sure who that is off the top of my head.
I say you take advantage of the one man who doesn't run away from anything and surely deserves better, and you make Jeff Neal versus Neil Magny. Okay, mm-hmm. It fulfills the funny name requirement that Joe Silva always loved, and which they have done their best to carry on since Joe Silva left. But it's also it's a ranked opponent that Jeff Neal can definitely beat.
Yep, makes sense to me. Book it.
All right, final fight of the card and final fight of the show. Final fight of the card that we're going to talk about. Therefore, the final fight of the show. Deiveson Figueiredo and Alexandre Pantoja fought in a flyweight contenders fight. Every fight in the UFC flyweight division actually nowadays is a flyweight contender fight. But these guys would have been contenders even before the division was brutally gutted. And Phil, you goddamn fool, you picked Pantoja.
All he needed was a bit more at the end of the fight and he would have fucked him up. Deiveson was on his way out.
He was a little bit. He was tired, but I thought Deiveson Figueiredo fought a really good fight here. A really weird fight.
It was super strange.
Really strange. Can I point out one thing Deiveson Figueiredo did here that is it has to get him in tremendous trouble someday very soon? He avoids punches by just not facing the guy who's trying to punch him. There were several exchanges where he's just standing side on, looking away. It's not like an angle because he was still largely in front of Pantoja, but he was just letting them miss his chin. Really, really weird. And it's just complemented by the fact that Figueiredo has this way of just being locked into each position. He's super dynamic between them. He even showed some really good head movement, but he is not a rote fighter. He is purely reactive. And until he's made the decision on how to react, he is just static. So he has a really weird look to his head movement where he's standing there, his head's right in the line of fire, he's watching the punch come in, and then he makes the move. There's no preemptive movement, there's no shying away. He's just fearlessly waiting for his brain to make the right defensive decision. And it doesn't always. But really bizarre boxing game from Figueiredo in this fight. And god damn it, I loved watching it. I love weird fighters. So What are your takeaways?
This was a great fight, and one of the ones for people who are just like, flyweights just aren't violent enough.
Ugh.
Like, one of the things about the Hunger Games Battle Royale-esque like tack that they've taken to this is that the remaining guys are really super violent.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this was a fight where I was just like, how are both of these guys not getting knocked out?
This was just a dehydrated bantamweight fight.
Yeah. And one where I felt like both guys, because of that, I feel, both guys will have more success at bantamweight than they might have otherwise, because they can still clearly fucking crack.
Mm-hmm.
You could just hear the impacts from these guys getting punched.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was one where I think Figueiredo was able to shake Pantoja a bit. And shake him a bit into being who he used to be, if that makes any sense. That, Figueiredo had decided on being on this counterpunching style and wanted to draw Pantoja into exchanges. And he did a decent job of getting out of the way of Pantoja's punches, and I think it reminded us that, like, when he's attacking, Pantoja is someone who is very aggressive and not necessarily all that, like,
subtle.
Yeah. He's become a much better counterpuncher, but he got drawn into those exchanges early by Figueiredo, and then after that, he was like, shit, I'm behind, I gotta fuck this guy up.
Yeah.
And just started going more and more nuts. Which, I mean, to his credit, just about sort of started to work at the end of the fight, but it was very Pyrrhic.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, yeah, you still didn't even win this round, but...
I mean,
like,
I think...
damn, you have a ton of heart and toughness.
This is... I think after the Formiga fight, like, I was a little more worried about Figueiredo going in here. I was like, like, the counters for Formiga, like, that style was really effective. I think this was a refresher to remind myself that fighters like Figueiredo are, in fact, nightmarishly difficult to counter. That really the main thing for Jussier Formiga that allowed him to beat Figueiredo was the counter wrestling. He was able to time really clean shots that were basically finished before Figueiredo even had a chance to start scrambling. Like that was a huge factor in that fight. Otherwise, if you were trying to counter with punches, Figueiredo is too fucking weird. His timing is too strange. And he knows it. Like, he
was also just he was completely willing to just eat shots and then...
Oh, absolutely.
And then just swing back as hard as he could.
Yeah, absolutely. But he also did a tremendously good job of feinting in this fight. He makes really weird reads, just like Yoel Romero. Like, the Romero flying knees that seemed to come out of nowhere. Like, Figueiredo had quite a few of those moments in this fight where he would just be like setting Pantoja up. Pantoja's like waiting to counter, and then you could just see Figueiredo did exactly the wrong thing for the counter Pantoja was hoping to throw. It would be like a weird step in elbow. It would be like a high kick instead of the left hand he was looking for. Man, I wish I had some more specific examples, but it's an audio format. What can you do? I just think it really demonstrated that, like, trying to wait on Figueiredo and punch him, A, he's tough, B, he's willing to get hit and hit you even harder, but C, like, really, really difficult to gauge his timing and at the same time determine which of his many strikes he is actually going to be committing to next. Yeah.
I think it also showed, like, I think I said this on Twitter, it showed the level of scrambling at flyweight, like, and the amount of levels of scrambling at flyweight. It's like boxing at featherweight. You're just like, wow, this guy's really good, and then someone beats him. You're like, wow, that guy's really good, and then someone beats them. So, I mean, because Pantoja was able to pick up the counter takedowns on Figueiredo, but he just wasn't able to keep them.
Yeah.
Figueiredo would just crazily athlete his way out of the scramble, and it was the fact that Formiga was able to completely lock down Figueiredo when he got his takedowns that was so impressive.
In retrospect, like, Formiga holding Figueiredo down is like Lomachenko poking holes in, like, Guillermo Rigondau's defense. Like,
yeah. And then you think about Joseph Benavidez, and you're just like, wow, this guy just gave his back to Formiga repeatedly,
right,
and then just got straight the fuck out again. I mean, he really is one of the, like, when you think about it more, you're like, wow, this guy really is one of the best, perhaps the best scrambler we've ever seen in MMA.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this was a great fight. I mean, I think this was the best fight on the card. It wasn't all pretty technique, but it was like heart and will from both guys. It went everywhere. It was awesome.
Yeah. When I said before, like, Neil Price probably had the biggest momentum swings of any fight on this card. It was the one that felt the most competitive from that perspective. But, like, Figueiredo Pantoja was by far, to me, the most entertaining fight on this whole card. And I consider that a very good thing. Now, please stop putting these goddamn fights on the prelims only. Like, This is a main card fight. Look what happened. You had fucking Krzysztof Jotko versus Marc-Andre Barrio on the main card. Imagine how good Figueiredo Pantoja would have been as an opening fight. So yeah, that's UFC 240, as well as the next week's upcoming ESPN card. And that's pretty much it for our episode this week. Phil, anything coming out that the people should read?
I've still got my long simmering piece on Robbie Lawler, but I'm not sure if I'm going to publish it before this week's card. I might publish it afterwards. But yeah, basically about a lot of the things that we talked about today. Who he's been, how he's changed over time, why he's like a Roberto Duran, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I've actually got I think I'll have a short little video coming out this week on BE. I'm just writing the script for it. And our video guy Case is doing the editing and everything, but it's also going to be about Robbie Lawler's struggles with wrestlers, basically. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I still have a friggin' Masvidal Noons piece that has yet to come out, but maybe it'll just come out the next time Jorge Masvidal fights.
That is the advantage I found with being a crippling procrastinator, is that you like make a piece and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get it done. I'm going to get it done. I'm going to get it done. Then suddenly they've got, like, it's months later and they've got another fight coming up and you're like, holy shit, I've got to get it done.
Is that an advantage, really? It's certainly a thing that I've noticed happening a lot. But
I mean, it does mean that your work doesn't go to waste. These people
true.
Don't
but
just disappear from the MMA world. You're always going to have, like, you're always going to be able to do, or at least within recent memory, there's always going to be an option to do a Masvidal piece at some point.
Yeah, but it does. The disadvantage is that I do still have to finish it, so it's really a double-edged sword. Okay, thanks all for listening. This has been Heavy Hands. Find us on the Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson, at Boxing Bush BUSCH. Contribute to our Patreon. There will be, before you have heard this episode, a bonus episode commentary, possibly two of them. Two Pernell Whitaker fights that I did some commentary and analysis for since Sweet Pea passed away just a couple weeks ago now. I think it was July 14th. So as a bit of a tribute to, one of the greatest boxers, one of the greatest southpaws, one of the very greatest defensive fighters, like a guy who you can make up as many categories as you want, and he's going to rank in like the top 5% each time. So check out the Heavy Hands Patreon for a little celebration of what made Pernell Whitaker great, and some of his greatest fights. And otherwise, we'll catch you guys next week. We'll be recapping Covington Lawler, of course, but also looking forward to Valentina Shevchenko versus Liz Carmouche. So we'll talk to you then. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Yeah, like when Conda got like his head blown off by Robbie Lawler, weren't you like, oh, please, no, stop! It has to remain attached. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've lost steam, Phil. I'm tired of talking to you now. I am going
Get out of here.
Good talking to you. Thanks for rescheduling to Tuesday and everything.
No worries. Glad you had glad your wedding was at least tolerable.
Yeah, appreciate it. It was perfectly fine.
Yep, enjoy the vivisection, and I guess I will see you for next week for another Valentina Shevchenko. I've got to be honest, I do kind of like Valentina Shevchenko cards just because she upsets you so much.
Yeah.
So it'll be...
I mean, at this point, it is becoming more of a struggle to, like, commit to the bit, and just, because, like, she did have, like, she's now had 2 or 3 really impressive performances in a row. But...
3 now, I think, yeah.
But I will insist. Has it been 3?
Yeah.
I thought it was, no, before Joanna, it was fucking Cachoeira, wasn't it?
Yeah, but she absolutely thumped her.
Yeah, fuck you, though. Come on.
See, that's
you don't take Cachoeira down, all right? I get it against Jessica I, because at least she's, like, won a fight before. Come the fuck on. Knock her out on the feet, you goddamn asshole. You're good enough to do it.
Connor. Keep that energy for the next week.
All right, okay. Well, I'll talk to you next Monday now that I'm good and pissed.
Cool.
All right.
See you, man.